The day an HOA president tried to throw a deployed soldier's wife and kids out of my house over a green plastic turtle. I learned something real ugly about power. Give the wrong person a clipboard and a little title, and they start acting like God in orthopedic sandals. Sarah called me shaking so hard I could hear it in her breathing. There was a child crying behind her, loud, scared, the kind of cry that tells you an adult just brought their mess right up to a kid's front door. She said the woman from the HOA had pounded on the door, not knocked, not rang the bell, pounded on it like she was serving a warrant. Then she stood there and told Sarah her lease was void, that I was in breach, and that if they weren't gone in 30 days, she'd have the sheriff drag them and their things out of her community. Her community. That phrase alone told me a lot. The reason for all this drama, all this poison, was a little turtle sandbox in the backyard tucked near the fence, barely visible from the street unless you stood at just the right angle and really wanted to be offended by something green and plastic. Now, I've spent a good chunk of my life around rules. I did 25 years in uniform Army Corps of Engineers, and when you live that life, you get real familiar with systems, contracts, procedures, command, all of it. You learn that rules matter, but you also learn something else. Rules in the hands of a decent person create order, and rules in the hands of a bully become a weapon. What Sarah described wasn't order, it was intimidation. A young mother, 2 kids' husband deployed halfway around the world, and this woman saw vulnerability the way a shark smells blood. I told Sarah to breathe, not to answer the door for that woman again, not to take down a thing, and definitely not to panic. I told her family was safe in that house. I said it calmly, but inside I was already cold. Not loud angry. Worse than that. Quiet angry. The kind that sits down, opens a file, and starts making notes. The woman's name was Karen. Of course it was Karen. I pulled the HOA documents for the property and went through them line by line. I'd read them before I bought the place, but this time I read them like I was disarming something. 112 pages of bylaws, covenants, procedures, definitions, all that bureaucratic wallpaper people sign without reading because they assume nobody could possibly care that much about mailbox colors and decorative shrubs. Karen cared. Or at least she cared when the rules gave her a chance to lean on people. And there it was, plain as day. The HOA could find me the owner if they believed there was a violation. They could send notices. In extreme cases, if dues or fines went unpaid, they could try to place a lien. What they could not do, what they absolutely had no power to do, was interfere directly with a private lease or threaten my tenants with eviction. Karen had either not read her own bylaws or she had, and decided fear worked better than truth. So I made a file on my computer and named it Karen. Petty maybe, efficient absolutely. I logged Sarah's call word for word. Date, time, exact threats, description of the incident, even the crying kid in the background. Then I called Karen myself. I kept my voice level, professional, polite enough to give her room to walk herself back. She answered sharp, like every phone call was an inconvenience unless she was the one causing it. I introduced myself as the owner of the house on Chestnut Drive. She gave this little pause, then came back with that syrupy, superior tone people use when they think they're already winning. She said, "Oh, the sandbox property." That told me everything. I asked her very simply where in the bylaws she believed she got the authority to threaten eviction. Silence. Thick silence. Then she puffed up and said it was her duty as president to enforce standards, that my tenants were in violation, that if I couldn't control my renters, she would. That was the exact moment any remaining benefit of the doubt died on the vine. I told her she would not contact my tenants again, that all communication came through me in writing, and that if she believed there was a violation, she could cite the bylaw and send formal notice. She skipped right over that and jumped straight to punishment. $200 immediately, then $100 a day until the sandbox was removed. Daily inspections too, she said, like she was guarding nuclear codes instead of patrolling a suburban fence line. Then she hung up. I drove to the property that afternoon. You know how sometimes you go see a thing yourself because part of you still hopes there's some angle you're missing. There wasn't. The sandbox sat in the back corner like the least threatening object in North America. To spot it from the street, you had to stand crooked, look through a break in the fence, and really commit to being ridiculous. I took photos from every angle, then sat with Sarah at the kitchen table and walked her through the bylaws. I watched the fear leave her face in slow increments. Underneath it was anger. Good. Fear makes you freeze. Anger, at least the clean kind, helps you stand up. A couple days later, the certified letter arrived. Karen had formally cited me under a vague clause about maintaining a harmonious appearance in the neighborhood. Lawn care, trash cans, paint colors, that kind of thing. Nothing about children's toys. Nothing about portable play equipment. She'd twisted a catch-all paragraph into a weapon because most people don't fight paperwork, they just fold. That was when I brought in Ben, a real estate attorney, former military too, a guy who understood both procedure and nonsense. He read my notes, looked at the pictures of the sandbox, read Karen's letter, and let out a low laugh that had no humor in it. He drafted a response that was polite on the surface and brutal underneath. It pointed out the lack of any actual bylaw violation, the improper contact with my tenants, the failure to follow due process, and it demanded copies of board meeting minutes and financial records that I was entitled to as a homeowner. Karen answered by escalating. She sent a notice of intent to lien the property for $1,500, her original fine plus 13 days of made-up daily penalties. I remember staring at that letter and thinking this woman really believes nobody's ever going to call her bluff. That was when the story turned, because up to that point it was just me versus a petty tyrant with a gavel. Then I called George, the retired mailman next door, and George did what quiet men often do. He opened a door and let the truth walk in. He told me Karen had been terrorizing people for years. Renters, single moms, elderly folks, anyone she thought would rather pay than fight. A garden hose 1 month, a bicycle on a porch the next, a welcome mat too wide, tomato plants in a backyard, a whole trail of small humiliations, each one just believable enough to scare somebody into compliance. George connected me to a family who'd sold their house after Karen hounded them for having a vegetable garden. Then to a single mother who'd burned through savings paying fines over her son's bike. Then to others. Some were too tired to get involved, and I can't blame them. But enough said yes. We met in a library room, a few towns over, 7 of us around a table, each carrying a little folder of proof and a lot of old resentment. I laid out a plan: formal grievances, certified letters, requests for mediation under the bylaws, demands for financial records. If Karen loved process so much, then fine, we'd give her process until it came out of the walls. That was the moment it stopped being a dispute and became a campaign. Then I found out something so perfectly ironic, I actually sat back in my chair and smiled. Karen worked as manager of a craft store in the commercial plaza I owned. Not rented space in a plaza like mine, my plaza. Same ownership group, same lease, same address I'd known for years. She'd spent months threatening my property while cashing checks inside another one of my properties. I didn't use that right away. Tempting as it was, I held it. You don't play your best card the minute you draw it. The pressure started getting to her. Our letters piled up. Our request for financial records hit the board. Then the HOA lawyer sent back a dismissive response refusing mediation altogether. That right there was gold. Their own bylaws required mediation before legal action. Karen had just put bad faith in writing. So we moved to the annual meeting. That night the clubhouse was packed, more neighbors than had shown up in years. Karen strutted in like she was hosting an awards banquet. She gave her little speech, pushed through the agenda, glossed over financials, swatted away questions, all the usual tricks. I let her build the tower herself. When she asked if there was any new business, I stood up. I gave my name, my address, and I said I wanted to discuss the board's pattern of harassment, selective enforcement, financial opacity, and refusal to follow its own bylaws. She tried to shut me down immediately, but by then my allies were already moving through the room, handing out copies of the dossier. Threat letters, fine notices, sworn statements, timeline, bylaw comparisons, budget analysis, page after page of what she'd done, sitting in the hands of the very people she'd bullied for years. I walked them through the Miller family and the sandbox. I had one woman stand and tell the room how Karen fined her over a bicycle. I read part of another family's statement about being pushed out over tomatoes. Then somebody from the front row shouted about a $20,000 fountain repair on a fountain that had been broken for 3 years. Another person demanded receipts. Another asked about legal fees. The room turned on her so fast it almost felt physical, like pressure dropping before a storm. Karen banged that little wooden gavel until nobody even looked at her anymore. I raised my hand and said there was an obvious remedy, a vote of no confidence. George seconded it. The motion passed by a landslide. Just like that, the queen of the cul-de-sac lost her crown in a room full of people she'd taught to fear her. George became interim president. The bogus lien vanished. The fines were wiped. The Millers could breathe again. That should have been enough. For most sane people, public humiliation would have been the end of it. But Karen wasn't sane in that particular way. Bullies aren't sane. She couldn't live with losing. So 2 days later, she tried one last dirty move. An anonymous complaint landed with the city and the military housing office accusing the Millers of running some unauthorized business out of the house, saying there was traffic noise, zoning violations, the whole made-up mess. That was it. Final line crossed. I made sure the city understood it was malicious retaliation. I made sure Sergeant Miller's chain of command understood exactly what had happened and that his family was being targeted. Then I put on a suit, took my binder, and drove to the plaza. Karen was inside the store chewing out a young cashier who looked about 19 and one insult away from crying. I walked in, and when she recognized me, the blood drained out of her face so fast it was almost impressive. She asked what I was doing there, accused me of harassing her. I told her I wasn't there about the HOA. I wasn't there about the house. I was there about the commercial lease. Then I said the sentence that finally cracked her composure wide open. "You work in my building, Karen." You should have seen her eyes. The meeting with her regional manager happened in the back office. Tiny room, no windows, smelled like cinnamon potpourri and panic. I laid everything out: the tenant harassment, the fake sandbox violation, the illegal lien threat, the retaliatory complaint against a military family. The manager read the binder in silence while Karen stood in the corner trying to look defiant and mostly looking cornered. When he got to the complaint against the Millers, he looked up at her and said very quietly that he didn't need a courtroom standard of proof to know she was a liability. She'd turned a personal vendetta into a company problem. She'd exposed them, the plaza, everybody, to legal and reputational damage. Then he suspended her on the spot, and from the look on his face, we all knew she wasn't coming back. She left carrying a cardboard box. And I'll tell you something, because life likes irony more than any writer ever could. Sometimes justice wears a robe, sometimes it carries a badge, and sometimes it walks out of a craft store with a stapler, 2 framed coupons, and a fake little plant in a box. A week later, there was a for sale sign in Karen's yard. Not long after that, the audit George pushed through found what all of us had suspected. She hadn't just been cruel, she'd been stealing. Money hidden under fake vendor payments, padded fees, nonsense expenses, even a supposed fountain repair that never happened. The new board turned it over to police. Eventually, Karen got picked up in another state and brought back in handcuffs. That's how her reign ended. Not with one last speech, not with dignity, not with some noble excuse. With cuffs. Oakmont Creek got lighter after that. Kids' toys came back into yards. Neighbors started talking again. The bylaws got cleaned up. The Miller family finished out the deployment without another problem. And when Sergeant Miller came home, he shook my hand like a man who knew exactly what had almost happened to his family. I told him the truth. Protecting them was the easiest moral decision I'd made in a long time. I guess the lesson, if there is one, is that bad people count on isolation. They count on you being tired, scared, busy, broke, or alone. They count on you not reading the fine print. They count on everyone else keeping their head down. What they never seem to expect is a few decent people comparing notes and deciding they've had enough. Karen picked a fight over a plastic turtle. In the end, she lost her title, her job, her house, and finally her freedom. That's not revenge, not really. That's just consequences arriving late but right on time. So tell me this. When somebody abuses a little bit of power to make innocent people miserable, do you think public humiliation and legal consequences are justice? Or do you think there's such a thing as going too far when you fight back? And have you ever dealt with a person like Karen in your own life? Somebody who mistook fear for respect,